Topic B is on solving rational equations or equations with fractions in them. This is probably the toughest topic that you're going to learn out of all the fractional equations that we'll be doing. So make sure you really are following along and rewinding if you missed something that you didn't really understand, okay? So follow these steps that are on your paper in front of you, and hopefully that will help you find a little bit more success with these types of problems. So the first thing you're going to do, according to this problem, is find the common denominator. So my denominators in example number 1 are x squared, x, and then this just has an invisible denominator of 1, right? So I'm going to find the LCD by looking for, we said, the highest exponent, if you remember. So my LCD is going to be x squared, okay? Now, step number 2 is to multiply everything by the common denominator to get an equivalent equation without any fractions. The whole point is to make this equation have no more fractions in them at all, okay? So I'm going to go through and I'm going to multiply every single term by x squared, which was my common denominator, okay? Times x squared times x squared. Now, think about logically what's going on right here. When I multiply this x squared, you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to write this out, each one individually, so you can kind of see what it's going to turn into. So the first term is 5 over x squared. I'm going to multiply that by x squared over, technically, over 1, right? So this x squared and this x squared will cancel each other out, and you end up getting 5. All right, so that right there was my first term. Now let's do the second term the same way. So the second term was 6 over x, right? In your equation, you had 6 over x. I'm going to multiply by the common denominator, which is x squared over 1. Now, this x and this x will cancel each other out. I have 1x left over, so this is 6x, okay? And then the last term that you have is negative 1. I'm going to multiply that by x squared, which is easy. I get negative x squared, okay? So put that all together into a new equation. Your new equation will now say, instead of 5 over x squared, this 5 over x squared right here, it will now just say 5. All right? Instead of this 6x right, or sorry, excuse me, 6 over x right here, it will turn into this 6x right here from our multiplication, right? So we're going to say equals, and then right here we're going to say 6x, all right? And then instead of this minus 1, it turned into negative x squared. So let's look back at what step 2 says. Step 2 says, multiply everything by the common denominator to get an equivalent equation without any fractions. See how now your new equation has no fractions in it, but it is equivalent to this original equation. Now all I have to do is solve my equation, and then I'm good to go. So since this is quadratic, I'm going to get everything on one side by making sure that I don't have any negative x squareds. That'll make things easier for me. So I end up getting x squared minus 6x plus 5 equals 0. Factor. I end up getting x minus 5, x minus 1, so that means my answers are 5 and 1. Okay? But what I need to do is I need to make sure that I check my answer. So you're going to need your graphing calculator in order to do this. So I've got two possible answers, either 5 or 1. I'm going to check 5 first. So please open up a document that is a calculator document. Please don't use the Scratchpad, okay? So I'm going to open up a calculator document. And the first answer that I got, you guys, was 5, right? So I'm going to take 5 and I'm going to store it in as x to see if my answer really works or not. So then I go back here and I'm going to type in to my calculator the original equation. And I'm going to check and see if this 5 really works for this original equation. So how do I do that? All I have to do is create a fraction, right, by pressing Control and then the divide sign right here. And so my first half of my equation is 5 over x squared. So I'm going to type it in exactly how I see it. Then I'm going to press the equal sign, which is this button right here, equals, oops, make sure you're out of that fraction in order for that to work for you. So I'm going to go out of my fraction, I'm going to say equals, and then I'm going to type in the next fraction, which is 6 over x, and then I'm going to type in this minus 1. And it tells me it is true. So that means 5 definitely works, okay? But I also have an answer of 1, right? So I got to see if this 1 works as well. So I'm going to take 1, I'm going to store it in as x, I'm going to press enter, oops, and then I'm going to go up, and I'm going to highlight the equation again, so that way I don't have to rewrite it. So again, all I did was just press the up button until this equation was highlighted. Press enter, it copies and pastes it for you. Press enter again, and it tests the value of 1 for you. They're both true, which means that this will work. So that means that my final answer for this question is 5 and 1. All right? Okay, so for number 2, we are going to do the same thing. We're going to find, step 1 is to find the common denominator. First thing we have to do is see if we can factor our denominators, which we cannot. They're already factored for us. So finding the common denominator will be nice and easy. We know that there definitely needs to be a w plus 1 in my common denominator. We also know that there definitely needs to be a w. So we'll put this in parentheses and we'll put the w in front. Okay, and then I don't need to include w plus 1 again because it's already in my common denominator. So what I need to do now is multiply everything through by my common denominator. So I'm going to take my first term, or my first fraction right here. So we're going to start with this 1 over w plus 1. I'm going to write on the left side here so I don't run out of room. Okay, so I'm going to take 1 over w plus 1 and I'm going to multiply by my common denominator, which is w times w plus 1 over 1. This w plus 1, this w plus 1, they cancel each other out. You have a w left over. Okay, so I'm done with the first one. Next one is 1. 1 times w plus 1. Sorry. This basically stays as w times w plus 1. All right, so I have finished the second term. All right, now the third term is 1. I know it's a negative. I'm going to ignore the negative just for right now. Over w times w plus 1. Okay, and I'm going to multiply by my common denominator, which is w times w plus 1 over 1. W plus 1's cancel, w's cancel, so I end up with just a 1. So now that I've done that, I can rewrite my equation. This is nice and easy. This shouldn't be an issue for you at all. So this term right here, once I multiplied through, turned into w. Okay, the equals just stays equals. The next term, this 1, turned into w times w plus 1. Okay, and then the last term turned into a minus 1 because of that minus sign. Okay. Now all I have to do, by the way, I no longer have any fractions in my equation. So now all I have to do is just solve my new equivalent equation, which is nice and easy. So I get w equals, I'm going to distribute this w first, w squared plus w minus 1. Subtract the w from both sides, I end up getting 0 equals w squared minus 1, right? Now all I have to do is factor it, so I get 0 equals w plus 1 times w minus 1, which means my answers are -1 and +1. But don't forget that we have to go through and check it in our calculators. So the first answer that I got was -1. I'm going to take -1 in my calculator, and I'm going to store it in as w. Cancel. That's what I mean to do. Store it in as w. Press enter. Now the calculator knows that -1 is my w. Then I'm going to type in my equation. So I'm going to do control divides to get my fraction. And I'm going to say 1 over w plus 1. All right. And then I'm going to say equals 1 minus, and then same thing, control divides, 1 over w times w plus 1. Close your bracket, your parentheses, press enter. It gives you, oops, sorry, I made a mistake. You need to make sure that you write down right here that this is W times W plus 1. You might not have had that issue. Some of the calculators, depending on how updated their software is, will have issues with that. So make sure you put a multiplication sign. Press your enter right here. You end up getting undefined equals undefined because if W is -1, this denominator is 0, and then I get 1 over 0, which is impossible. Which means that my answer that I got of -1 right here must be omitted. It does not work. Okay, but let's check the 1. So if I put the 1 in, and I store that in as W, enter, press the up button so that your equation is highlighted, enter, enter, it's true, so it does work, which means that my only answer that works for this problem right here is just 1. So my final answer is 1.